We posted on the Twitters recently if anyone had any questions for myself and Sandy Munro in the United States, who really knows a lot of stuff. And we got loads of questions, which was fantastic. So before we dive into that, I just want a quick mention of what is coming in 2023. Our 6 live shows around the world: Sydney, Farnborough, Harrogate, San Diego, Vancouver, Amsterdam. That's all 6, and I've remembered all of them, and I'm really proud. The first one is in Sydney on the 11th and 12th of March. They're all going to be absolutely amazing. What we're seeing arriving there is incredible. Really big name speakers coming on to the opening ceremonies and all that stuff. It's all on the webpage at fullycharged.show. Have a look there. Tickets already available and actually already selling quite well for Sydney. So a lot to look forward to. But that's all I want to say about that. And now let's go over to lovely Sandy Munro, and we're talking to him from live here in the Fully Charged studios. Sandy, really good to see you. Thank you so much for joining us today for our little question and answer session.
Very good, Robert. I'm here for you, and hopefully prepared.
Very good. Yeah, me too, exactly. So let's go to our first question.
What is your favorite EV and why?
Yeah, I'm gonna give you 2 answers. My favorite EV for driving is the Model Y, the Tesla Model Y, and my favorite work vehicle, actually the favorite of all the guys here, is the F-150, the Lightning.
The Lightning,
F-150.
yeah, it's pretty impressive, isn't it? I'm going to go for a car I've only driven, I don't have, which is the Porsche Taycan, because I really did enjoy driving that, and it's the first time a man of my age managed to get out of a low sports car and not grunt after a long drive. And that was, for me, a big plus. So it was a grunt-free, low riding sports car, but an amazing car to drive. Really was enormous fun.
Which physical buttons would Sandy and Robert like to have back?
Okay, so I'm in the process of telling everybody to get rid of buttons.
Yeah.
I've looked at several different designs, and I'd like to swap those buttons for paddles on the steering wheel.
On the steering wheel. Oh, that's a clever. Yeah.
But I don't want any buttons.
Right, because actually I drove. There's a couple of cars I've driven recently that had screens, touch screens, all that, but underneath was a button which was heater on, heater off, and it was kind of nice when you're driving. You just go dung, and it was so easy. You didn't have to look or do it. It was a big physical button, and I kind of quite like. I'm happy just to have heating, and screen demisting, like a button that you press that goes click, and you've done it. That was it's really when you're driving. The rest of it, the screen is so. I use the screen all the time, like we all do. But it was nice. So I've got a bit of a. I just want to annoy Elon and have that make Tesla have one button.
What car would you revive from history?
There was a car, and I wish I knew what it was, but we'll find a picture of it. I saw in a museum in the Netherlands, an American pickup truck that had a, and it was all beautifully built, coach built, was beautiful. It had a caravan, like a trailer that you could live in. I don't know what you call that, like an airflow trailer, but it was built so that the front half of it hooked over the back of the pickup truck. But it was all made in one style from, I would think, the early 1950s, and it was beautiful. It's in mint condition in a garage, and I've always wanted one like that. So you have a really, but you can unhook the trailer, so you've just got a pickup truck.
Well, I'll tell you what, I'd love to have my my Morgan Super Sport back.
Yeah.
I had that when I was in my early 20s, and my ex-wife hated it because it, you could touch the ground when you were sitting at the steering wheel. But if I could, that's the car I'd like to have back. And right. I just really enjoyed that vehicle a lot.
What are the single biggest improvements to electric cars that manufacturers could make, excluding lighter, denser batteries?
I mean, I'd go faster charging, I suppose, but actually, it's kind of, we've already reached a point where that's pretty effective.
Yeah. So if it was up to me, I'd like to see induction charging universally. It's faster, it's DC, and so I'd like to see that. And I don't believe that I don't believe there are many cars that can do induction charging right now, but that would be my first and favorite thing to see happen.
In the past decades, there have mainly been 8 big auto manufacturers. Do you see that being the case in about a decade from now, with the rest being niche or specialty?
I know that the mighty will fall real soon. Toyota used to have 12 million vehicles a year. The projection for 2023 year end is something like 7 million. That's
Wow.
a big hit.
Yeah.
Volkswagen waited too long. They're going to have a problem. And GM doesn't have enough product in the marketplace. So the top 3, I think, will some of their prowess is going to disappear in favor of places like Hyundai, Ford.
Yeah.
Tesla is definitely going to be a big player. And then we talk about the Chinese, and that's
Sure.
going to be huge. BYD is going to be maybe the biggest player on the planet in 10 years.
Yeah. No, I think I agree entirely. I mean, I was only going to add about the Chinese. I mean, certainly BYD, NIO, Xpeng, you know, those the Chinese manufacturers that are now on sale in Europe, you know, they've just started to really start big time exporting that.
Yeah.
It's going to make a big impact. Yeah.
When do you think EVs will be lower priced than comparable ICE cars in the economy segment?
That's a very good question and annoying. And also, I've always thought that there was a tendency for the traditional established automakers who don't want to stop people buying their petrol and diesel cars to price the electric ones a bit higher so that they protect, you know, that they could make an electric car cheaper now. I've heard that argument more than once. I don't know if I'm right.
Well, the number that I've been saying is that it'll be either sometime between 2025 and 2020 and early 2028. That's where you're going to find that.
And that's where it'll cross over.
That's where they cross
electric will
over,
be
the
cheaper.
50% point, yeah.
Yeah.
What further changes do Tesla need to do in order to make the Model 3 and Model Y under $27,000 to produce?
The thing I've heard, Sandy, from Elliott in China is that they have reduced the price of a Tesla in China by quite a considerable amount very recently in the last couple of weeks. I don't know if you've heard that.
Yeah, I did. And they can basically, if they wanted to kill the industry, they could drop their price currently. They make more profit than any car company,
Yeah.
period. Nobody makes as much profit as they do, but they also have shareholders that they want to make happy. So having a big profit's a big deal. They could probably, eventually, if they wanted to, they could probably cut the price down to somewhere around 30,000, maybe a little bit more.
Why are most new EVs SUV sized?
It's where you start normally. That's the highest profit margin for a vehicle is either a truck or an SUV. And to recoup the investment costs and whatnot that you'll have for next generation vehicles, you usually start off and the rich pay. The rich will pay more for being first on their block or, you know, that kind of thing.
When is efficiency going to be the first stat reviews state?
Oh, that's interesting, because that's something we've talked about a lot, Sandy, with how efficient cars are. You know, when I first drove the Hyundai Ioniq, the very original one, I was amazed because it didn't have a big battery, but it had a ridiculous range by the standard of the day, because it was doing over 5 miles to the kilowatt hour, well over 5 miles, you know, and it was easy to get that. It wasn't like I was driving particularly carefully. And ever since then, every vehicle I've driven is slightly less efficient. But I've got to say, Tesla are always out in front. My Tesla goes further on a kilowatt hour than any other vehicle I've driven for a long time.
Right. And that's because of efficiency of design. So last night, again, Jim Farley said that in one of his speeches, he said our wiring harnesses weigh over 100 pounds more than what Tesla does. This is for charging.
Yeah.
And he said, we've got to get rid of that. That's inefficiency. And that's true, because when you have the extra 100 pounds, weight is a big contributing factor to the efficiency of the vehicle.
Yeah.
So that's a big deal. The other thing is friction. and everybody is trying to address the friction aspect. And then you've got aerodynamics. A truck is like a brick going through the air.
Yeah.
It's not a very efficient or effective way, but you also have to do something about the style and the shape and whatnot. So next generation pickup trucks might look quite a bit different than the way they look right now if they want to try and get to that more efficient aero kind of situation. So those, the biggest factor as far as I'm concerned is design efficiency, and I believe you're going to see every vehicle and every car company focusing their attentions on how do we reduce the weight, how do we reduce the friction, how do we make it so it's more aerodynamic, how on and on and on. So efficiency is something that's on everybody's to-do list right now.
When will vehicle-to-grid become commonplace, and will all new vehicles have it?
So I just want to say, Sandy, when I do public talks, when I mention the idea of vehicle-to-grid to people who have no knowledge of electric vehicles or what they might be, you can really hear it gets their attention, because they suddenly think about that whole process of what, I explain an electric car is a computer and a battery on wheels. It's not. It is a car, but it's also something else, and it's certainly something that has caught a lot of public attention here, and it's just starting to appear as a notion. I've only learnt recently from Volkswagen that all new Volkswagens the hardware exists within them. They're built within for bi-directional charging, and it's not turned on in the software, but it exists in the hardware in the vehicles, and that's the same going forward. Really, the only company I know of that do not have anything to do with vehicle-to-grid is Tesla. Everyone else seems to be toying with the idea, even if they're not doing it yet. But I don't know if you heard any different to that.
This is part of the public psyche or the public psychology that has to be overcome. Now every Ford is going to be always bi-directional.
Yeah.
And all it is taking diodes out and putting a semiconductor in. It's a change on the circuit boards. It's not a giant deal here, and it's not huge cost, but it's a huge benefit to the customer.
Yeah.
Gigantic. And you're right, Tesla doesn't do it, and I have no clue why.
Should government start setting standards for amount of particulates produced by brake pads and wheels?
So, Sandy, this comes out of a story that came out in this country a while ago, which was trying to imply that electric cars, because electric cars were heavier, they wore out their tyres and brakes faster, and they created more particulates, so it was cleaner to drive a diesel. I can't imagine who would have funded that research.
Because you start to learn, after you get an electric vehicle for any length of time, you learn how to drive with one pedal. And when you do that, you actually don't use your brake pads because you're using regen, which pumps the energy back into the battery. Because you're using regen, your tires never get a flat spot. You get flat spots when you jam on the brakes. This regen doesn't do that. So you get even more like a nice even wear. Brake pads should last you about triple with an electric vehicle. And as far as flat spots are concerned, you shouldn't get them if you're driving with one pedal.
As someone who is in a very long waiting list for an EV, how do we solve the supply chain problem?
The supply chain problems right now are manifold. They're huge, and solving them is not going to be an easy task because, quite frankly, all industry around the world was tempted into going into globalization. Don't build it yourself, outsource it. Okay, the piper now has to be paid. The good news is the materials are in the ground. They're in Portugal, they're in Spain, they're in the Netherlands, they're all over the place. We have tons of, in fact, I came back from Saudi Arabia last week, I was there, and the desert that we looked at is saying, oh, well, nothing going on there. The Sahara Desert is full of the stuff we need. They got lithium, they got everything they need in order to make batteries there, except for one thing. They need graphite. Graphite, 93% of all graphite comes from China. And the reason for that is because it's really nasty, but there's a company in Finland that has figured out how to take a waste byproduct from making pulp and paper and turning that, it's called lignin, taking that and turning it into graphite.
Right.
This is going to be our savior because that is the only thing we can't get here for making batteries. And I'm telling you flat, we're going to suffer, and I mean big time suffer for at least another year and a half, maybe longer, maybe 2 years, because of the short-sighted strategy that came out of Harvard.
What will the energy density be in a new EV in 20 years' time?
There's so many advances going on right now with slow discharge capacitors. If we can get to a point where we can actually make these things work, then the weight of the battery would be less than an internal combustion engine. I mean, it would be next to dirt. You could have range that could go from, you could drive across the country if we can figure out how to make these things work, because basically you've got lightning in a bottle right now. That's kind of what a capacitor is. If we can figure out how to slowly discharge that gigantic amount of energy into a smaller battery pack that's probably going to be a solid state battery, then you've got a giant winners.
The only thing I can add to that is that the number of battery scientists and engineers that I've spoken to in the last, say, 5 years, I know that probably 3/4 of those projects are never going to work. They're never going to come to fruition.
Yeah.
But one of them is. And
Yeah,
all
exactly.
of them, we're talking 10 to 20 times energy density per kilogram, so a huge increase, not just at the moment we're getting little percentage increases. I mean, even in the last 12 years, amazing increases overall, haven't
exactly.
we? But we're talking, batteries that are 20 times more energy dense and are solid state, as you've said, than we have now, which would mean you could have a battery effectively that was 20 times smaller and lighter than the one you're using now, but still have the same range.
But I'm telling you right now, in 20 years, 1,000-mile range is not going to be that difficult.
No, I'm sure.
It just won't be.
Yeah.
20 years is a long time. Think about it, and from a technology standpoint, how long did it take to go from the age of sail to basically the nuclear age or the space age?
Yeah.
I mean, it happens very quickly when you put all the best let me rephrase that. Not MBA kind of minds, but if you put engineering minds to it, problems get solved and life gets better. Yeah. So I think in 20 years, you may, you may have something about the size of your cell phone that you pick up and drop into the car, and that's good for 1,000 miles or something.
What battery cell form and chemistry will likely win over the next 5 years?
Cylindrical batteries, the 4680 is just about as good as it gets. The 4680 now has two chemistries, one that's coming from Cato and one that's coming from the guys in Texas. And the one in Cato, which is the experimental one, is bone dry. When they say dry cell, they are truly meaning dry. I think it's about as close as it can get to solid state battery. Prismatic and pouch cells, there's a lot of problems in manufacturing those correctly and at speed. And then you've got solid state batteries, and I haven't seen one yet that is going to be ready for production in 5 years.
Well, that's all we got time for. What an amazing man Sandy is. He's such a joy to talk to. He knows so much. What an absolute mine of information. Fascinating stuff. Absolutely fascinating. Please do subscribe to the Fully Charged Show. Please do have a look at the little Patreon link. All the show notes about what we've been talking about are in the description beneath this lovely, gorgeous, data-rich video. And tell your mates about it as well. That's always a good idea. So we get more people come watch the Fully Charged Show. That's all. As always, if you have been, thank you for watching.